Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Patrick with Stacking Layers. Today's video, I'm going to go over a couple little things here. As you can see, I have my Hurakan printer here with a different type of hot end, which you may have already seen in my previous videos. This is the BIQU H2 V2s Lite, long name. And it's, in my opinion, a really cool hot end. So I want to do, I guess, a quick review-ish type thing, not too in-depth on this one specifically, but I'm going to talk about what I feel about this, but also go into how to install it on a Hurakan. And pretty much this goes for most any other printer that you would consider installing this on, like an Ender or something like that. But I also wanted to show something because I have a special little piece here, which I don't know if you noticed already, but I got this little blue thing back here. I was contacted not too long ago by PCBway of all places, and they said that they would be interested in doing a little sponsor and making something for me or something like that. I could have done a video plug, but I figured why not? I've been having this little idea to have a mount made for the H2 hot end instead of using the adapter setup, which is this whole thing. So this is the original mount, the black part. And then I had to print out this adapter to get the H2 on. Now, the disadvantage of that is that you have to print out this bracket, and then that basically takes away about 15 millimeters or so of where the nozzle is or whatever. So, because as you can see, it sticks out pretty far. Now, of course, the original hot end on these things is already on a pretty large box, but with this hot end being so small, you doing something like this actually gives me more range of motion, so I can meet the nozzle all the way to the back of the bed with no problem now. And that's actually a problem with going or upgrading to a nozzle like this or a complete hot end system. What happens is you tend to lose some of the back areas. You get maybe about 10 millimeters or so that you can no longer print in. And so your homing is off and everything. You have to move switches and things, or you have to, if you have enough room on your y-axis rail, you might be lucky and be able to actually pull the bed all the way out. Well, some of these machines you can't. You just lose that back, good 10 millimeters or so. So that was my main thing. But what was really cool is how they PCBway contacted me. I'm thinking, well, okay, I don't know a lot about making electronics necessarily. I mean, I go through schematics and all that type of stuff, and I'm pretty, I can understand the schematics, but to design it, that I don't have much training in. So to actually design something, but then I realized that they don't do just PCBs. They do 3D printing, CNC machining, and they also do sheet metal bending. And that's where I got the idea, okay, well, let's try to make this mount. And so that's what I did. And I designed it in Fusion 360 using basically the same whole specifications as what this guy had on it. So I knew it would match up on the rail. So basically it's designed to fit any 2020 style V extrusion that uses the V roller wheels. So you got your eccentric nut down here on the bottom. That's adjustable. And then the two stable ones on the top, of course, pretty standard. So basically what I did was, as you can see, I have this little bend on the top here that is for cable ties, which I need to redo this. I didn't really do a good job on that right now because I want to replace all of these wires to get something a little bit longer, a little bit cleaner. But yeah, so I've got some cable adjustment areas here, or cable tie places, plus maybe I can design something to cover it up completely, make it a little cleaner looking. And then I just designed the two little holes with standoffs. I don't know, I should have recorded this part because it's actually a really nice part. I definitely got to give PCBway props for the quality of it. So down inside there's two little standoffs. I'm not sure if you can really pick those up in there, but there's two standoffs that you can see are connected back here. So they're really well attached, and then they're through holes, so they fit and line up to the holes like these side, but on the other side for mounting. I also designed this little bend here, which they did great with how small the holes are and stuff like that. But then two things. One, I realized that my measurements were slightly off, even though I did make an oblong hole. My measurements were off. I was using a pre-made CAD design of this hot end, so I guess those holes were slightly off with the measurements. But anyways, They made it to my measurements, but my measurements were slightly off. But then I realized I don't even need this part. So I have redesigned it without this part on it, because just using these two standoff posts is more than stable enough. The thing doesn't move at all. So yeah, that was pretty good. But otherwise, I mean, as you can see, it's pretty simple. I did choose to have a blue anodization, I think is what it was on this one. I'm not sure if that was powder coated or anodization. I can't remember now. But a really nice finish. So I do got to give props to the PCBway team. They did not tell me to say any of this type of stuff. They said just use, show it off and use my imagination with what I want to say. So they gave me total freedom on this, which is pretty nice of them. And I really have to say I'm impressed. I'm really stoked to have this part. It feels good to be able to design something and not only just 3D print it, but actually get, a more of a solid piece. This is, it's a nice aluminum, 2.5 millimeter thick aluminum, bent to my preferences, cut and bent and all. And it came out perfect. The holes were exactly what I measured, everything. So they did a great job. So thank you, PCBway, for that. And enough of that part. So let's go on to how to install this thing. I'm going to get this mount back on. As you can see, I'm missing the wheel here. It's there. So I'm going to get that back on. I'm going to flip the machine over and show you how we wire this thing up. I guess on the front first I can show you. Oh, I got to mention there. Sorry, there's one other thing I did make. If you notice this little hot end mount, this is overkill, over-engineered, but I'm not hot end. The probe, the micro probe mount. I did have them also do that, see how their CNC machining worked. And that actually really impressed me. I don't know if it's the camera's picking up, but like even little chamfers that I designed into it, because I did originally design this for 3D printing, so it should be able to be printed with no supports. And I just thought, I wonder if they would be able to do that. I threw the design in there. They sent back the quote saying, yeah, no problem. And they did it. And I mean, it's spot on. I even had them thread the little holes in there, so I didn't need to use nuts, and the thing was awesome. So yeah, that's another part of it. I forgot about that part. So it's designed to fit perfectly on. So I got a mount and a probe mount all set. Both are aluminum, so they're super light. Didn't add much weight at all to this. Actually, I think after removing this, it feels actually lighter. I think this setup is heavier. I didn't measure them, unfortunately, but it did feel lighter on its own. So yeah. So what are we going to do to install this? So of course you need to route your wires. So the way I've routed it is with the this is a micro probe, BIQU micro probe, but same with the BL Touch or whatever probes you want. So you mount your, you route your wires all the way through. You got your probe, your fans, hot end, your extruder motor, cooling fan, part cooling fan, and your, thermistor and heater and all that stuff. So get all your wires together. Put them through a loom and get them into the back of the printer. Make sure they're long enough. I recommend now, after I've done this, because some of these are really short, I recommend minimum 1.5 meters of wires to give you some extra thing. If you can go 2, that's better to have too much than not enough. You can always just, curl them up and zip tie them up underneath or chop them off later. But that way you have good freedom of motion. You're not, stressing out any wires. Because right now the way these wires are at full, when it goes fully up on the Z, it's a little bit too tight for my liking. So the one that's on this hot end, I think is just over 1.5 meters from this point. So yeah, it's something recommended. Now, of course, you can use this. If you guys are doing it on the Hurakan, you can do this. Let me get this mount off. I was originally using it with this and this plastic mount. But because of the offer, I mean, it worked great. Honestly, it worked perfect the way it was. But because of the offer, I decided, hey, why not? Let's try that. And I honestly like to have most of my wires, if not all, routed completely to the main board instead of going through these extra breakout boards. I just feel it's just one extra thing that can go wrong. And I know some people do have problems with them and stuff. But unfortunately, one of the issues with this board, it's not actually an issue, it's just something to gripe about, is the size of the connectors. So BIQU did a great thing with this thing because there's no special circuitry on here. All they've done is, they've routed all the wires through for your heater, your fans, your probe is over here. and then you have the thermistor. So the red one's the heater, this other big one's thermistor. Those two are the standard. Actually, that one's a little bit smaller too, I think. But this one is definitely the standard XH, what is that, 2.54 or something like that. So the standard plugs that we use in these printers. These little guys are what are they? 150s, I think they are, or 175s. I can't remember the exact size now, but they're not as easy for me to get, and they're difficult for a lot of people to get that size. And of course, the BL Touch one is the same. The probe is the same tiny, like a Pico blade style on here as it is on the probe itself. So it's a really tiny probe. The wires exist and everything. There's the crimps and all that exist. The problem is that they're very tiny and very difficult to crimp for a lot of people. It does take practice. I mean, I've done a bunch of them, so I'm okay at it. I'm not going to say I'm a pro or anything, but I don't have an issue. My main issue was finding them. I have a really hard time sourcing them in my location. I found them on AliExpress, and I can only buy like 10 plugs with crimps at a time. I can't even buy like the whole set, which you can with these. You can get like a 200, 500 piece set with all different sizes and crimps and everything ready to go. You can even get them with the crimps if you don't, the plier parts if you don't have that. So it'd be nice to get those. And that was my main reason why I didn't do much with this hot end. I still routed all the wires back, was because I didn't have all these plugs. So I used just the BIQU microprobe wire, since that was already there and routed, so that was easy. And then, believe it or not, what I did was I repurposed the hot end for this fan's plug. So what I did is, you can see here, this is the fan plug right there instead of the hot end. So I took both of the hot end wires, the positive and negative, or control and voltage, and I put them both into crimps for there, just to give a beefier thing, like how they have it here. So I'm getting 24 volts across there. Just probably wasn't necessary, but I did that just to keep the amperage more even across. And so I can use that plug, which these are connected to control the fan instead. So I basically moved this to the fan plug. So if you're thinking about doing this and you're only want to use the fans for this fan, then, want to use a fan and only the part cooling fan, like I did, you can repurpose that plug. Not that I recommend it or anything, unless you know what you're doing. It's definitely important to know what you're doing, because if you do it wrong, you'll short things out. But yeah, so that was one thing I did do with this. All the rest of them were good. Now, as you notice, there's no hot end, I said that again. There's no extruder plug on here, so that must be routed to the back. So again, that's my thinking. If you're going to be routing at least 1 or 2 sets of wires to the back anyways, just get the whole group. Bypass all this so you don't have to worry about different wire looms and different connections here and there. Get it all nice and set and clean. So that's what I've done here. So let me get this thing put into place, and I'll flip the machine. I'll be right back. Okay, here we are on the underside. Hopefully you're able to see that. I'll zoom in on certain things here that I've done. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to change, of course, when I do the wiring, is I'm going to get rid of the DuPont style connectors here. This is for the extruder. So basically, let's see, I got this tucked underneath here. There is the original extruder plug. So that comes out, and then you put that in. Now with the H2, the wire that comes with it is ready to go. If you're using a BIQU board, a Big Tree Tech board, because their system is set up to work together, with BIQU and Big Tree Tech being basically the same companies. So that's something to keep in mind, that if you're installing this on like a Creality machine or some other machines, their pin out for their motors, basically where the coil A, coil B are connected, are a little bit different. So keep that in mind. Sometimes the 2 center wires need to be swapped. So if you're having issues, basically check the pin out of your driver output to make sure which ones are which. So you have like a 1A, 2A, and a 1B, 2B. And so here it goes, what is it again? I think it's BAAB. And so, yeah, basically you have the different coils like swapped. Like, so the first 2 are not one coil and the second two are not one coil or something like that. I would have to look at the diagram again to know exactly, but do keep that in mind that it's not always just straight plug in. Sometimes you have to switch. Most of the time it's the two center wires you'll have to flip only on one side. So that's that. So yeah, so we got the extruder motor, comes in here, up into here. Now this is all doing to where you're not going to be changing any firmware. So this is going to be plug and play, ready to go. There's your extruder motor into the first driver. It's set up on this one instead of the last one, which is more typical. So keep that in mind. This is E and then X and Y and Z. With Z, if you do a dual Z kit, it doesn't have an extra driver, but it does have an extra Z port, and that's this guy here. So if you plug another one here, they work in parallel. So this driver controls both of them at the exact same time. You're not going to have anything like the tilt adjustment on Z, but you'll be able to have a dual Z system to run. So give it more power and whatnot on the lift and keep things even. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind if you ever think about doing a Z upgrade on this one. It will only be powered, but it won't have individual Z control because there's no other place to put a new stepper on this board. So anyways, that was just something I wanted to point out since I was telling where the steppers were. So this first one here is your fan 0. This is where the part cooling fan is going to go. The next one is your F1 fan. So that is, or what they call fan 1. This is fan 0, fan 1. Fan 1 is connected to the heat sink on the hot end. So that's the part that winds up and starts cooling to keep the path of the filament cool before it gets to the hot end, so you don't get any heat creep and all that stuff. So that's what that fan's for. So on the H1, it's the clear fan, the one on the side that does not for part cooling. It's for cooling the heat sink. That's where that goes. The other fans that are there, this one's unplugged right now because I have taken off the bottom plate here. So those are the two internal fans. So you got this one here. That one's connected to this fan up here. So if you get it, that one's there. So that's that one. Let me zoom in on these fans, get a little bit better view. There is hot glue that comes on these things, so when you're changing these, you're gonna have to carefully pick off the hot glue. Take your time. You can use, if you get like a little dropper with some isopropyl alcohol, it breaks apart the bond for hot glue. So that's a nice little tip, and it doesn't damage electronics. Don't, spray it like crazy. Don't douse it in, but if you drip it onto there, it can help, in between the separation there. If you get a tiny little bit of gap, drop some alcohol in there, and it'll peel right off. But anyway, so yeah, fan 0, fan 1, and fan 2. I think they actually label it fan 3, or you have fan 2, fan 3, but I believe these two are in parallel also. So these two on the bottom work together, and these are the case fans. So it's nothing really you need to worry about. Just put them back in. So this is for the fan up here, like I said, and then this is for the fan that's attached to the whole bottom plate. And then again, look at the drivers. Driver E, X, Y, and Z. And this is the one I need to replace, but that's where your extruder motor goes. Then you got down here, this is the BL Touch or micro probe for this guy, the BIQU micro probe. So this is your probing port. The way it is plugged in here, starting from the right-hand side going this way, you're going to have ground, 5-volt, and servo control, which is the yellow one there. Wire colors don't matter. Wire colors are not going to tell you what these things do. Basically, they can be all be black, which they are on the original probe. Excuse me. But the pinout is what's important. So you got ground, 5-volt, and then sense are those first three coming this direction. The last two here is ground again, and the very last one on, or would be the first, but the very last one here on the left is your actual sensing pin. So the two ones that you set up in firmware are the yellow one and the white one here, which is the center pin is control for your servo, makes the pin go up and down. And then the last one is the sensing. So that one is when the probe touches, that's the one that's getting the sense. So control and sense in Clipper firmware. Other things you got is your thermistor wire. This is the white one that came with it. It's plugged in down here. This one up on top is for the bed. So the second one down is your thermistor wire. And then you have, let's get down a little bit more. I think you can see it through these wires. This first thing next to the fuse here is for your hot end heating. So we've put in the wires there. One thing to do is, if you have this already opened, it's probably a good idea, as you can see possibly there. See the little white things I got on there? I've added ferrules to the wires. Gives it a better connection. I snip off the little pieces. If you see that there's a soldered wire in there, what they call tinned wire, snip that piece off, put these ferrules on if you can get them. It's definitely recommended, and it gives you a better solid connection, less chance of anything overheating due to high resistance from poor connection. If you search the internet, I've ever seen anybody showing off these areas that are burnt, and they're like, why didn't the fuse blow, or why didn't that happen? The reason is because if you don't have a good solid connection inside here, it's going to actually increase the resistance there, and it doesn't increase the amperage, so the fuse is not going to blow. This is the same amperage coming through, but because it's a higher resistance, the wattage increases, so the heat increases in there, and it actually gets hot enough in there to melt these terminals and can cause fires. So if you have tinned soldered tips in there and they're not properly torqued down, if they're torqued too tightly, they can start cracking over time and start drifting. The solder will actually start kind of smearing, or not smearing, but it will start kind of like flattening out, and it'll loosen up the connection, and then it can build up little carbon bits, and it can just, cause a higher resistance in there over time, which can cause overheating and burning. So I always recommend open these things up. Unfortunately, it's a very common thing, including with this machine. The wires are just tinned and put in there because it's a very cost-effective way of doing it, and it does work, but it can become dangerous if you don't pay attention, if you don't do regular maintenance and check that things are still tight in there, which the average user isn't going to open up the machine and do this stuff, but it honestly is recommended. It's something you guys should get into with these hobby machines and know what that's all about. So I did want to point that out. Get these ferrules if you can. They're cheap when you consider your board burning out. These things are cheap and they're good to have, and they're really good for projects. Any type of electrical projects. You put the ferrules on there and you got a great solid connection. So that's the wiring. I do have some extra stuff here. I have these blue, green, and yellow wires because I have disconnected. That was the other thing. The LEDs, the RGB cables are up. I'm going to point out a frame. The RGB cables are up here. These are not connected right now, but since I don't have that other hot end, I don't have any lights anymore. That was the other disadvantage of getting rid of this guy, is I no longer have those two nice little LEDs pointing down. So that kind of was a disadvantage, but it's no big deal. I do have plans to add more later. So that's what would be here. So I did route some wires already. Let me zoom out so I can go back and forth what I'm talking about. Yeah, some of these wires in here that are bundled up. So I'm going to do that. But yeah, that's it. I had to route the fans, the motor, the probe, and the heater and thermistor. And that's really all it is. With this DuPont, I do recommend changing it to one of these things. Those are the XH 2.54 connectors. Do that because you're going to have a solid connection. These DuPonts here, I can just wiggle it, and you can't really tell, but it's just hanging there now. That came right out. So over time, they can actually fall out, and you will get an error of a couple different things. One, your hot end just won't move, or if it does move, it'll make a really weird grinding sound. If you hear that, and it has been working, and all of a sudden you get this weird grinding sound, check your wires. Possibly one of the connectors are not fully seated, so there's not made a good connection. Another thing that can happen is actually your printer will the main controller board will shut down. It'll send a kill command to shut down the board because it senses something. You'll get a message like, for instance, open on B or something along the lines. I can't remember exactly what it says. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it basically tells you that there's like a short or an open circuit on one of the steppers, for instance. And what's going on is that it's actually not making a connection with one of the coils, so it sees it as a broken wire. So if you get those type of errors, your machine's shutting down when you try to go and extrude, for instance. If you've used this connector, that's probably why. You want to go back inside there and push it in and get it seated well. Unfortunately, that's just the way these things are. They're made for being used for all types of different plugs. So, BIQU doesn't know which machine you're going to put it on, so they just give you a plug. It's easy just to cut that, crimp new things, and put these things on since it fits in that. So that's another thing I recommend doing. Get that thing done like I'm going to. Otherwise, there's really not much else to it. It is that simple. So if you're going to install an H2, and this goes for all the H2 extruders, and pretty much any extruder, if you think about it, they're all the same. You got a motor, a hot end, a thermistor, and some fans. That's your primary things. And then you have your extra stuff of like, a sensor, a probe, lights, things like that. So those are extras. But all you have to do is route your wires through, plug them into the certain parts, and that's it. And make sure your configuration is set up. This one being that I did change to the H2, the extruder motor does need to be changed. Basically, you got to change your rotational distance, and that is like 3.332 in that range, something. I forget the exact number, but it's right in that range. You can set it up. If you were to do it on a Marlin system, it's like 932 steps per millimeter, something in that range. And of course, you're going to want to do calibration, although my E-steps calibration, every time I do it, is spot on to what these things are. It's all based on mechanical limits anyways, or the actual gear sizes is what these rotational distances are based on, because that is what it is how much the gear turns to create, from one full revolution, rotational distance, one full revolution will make a straight line of how many millimeters, essentially. And so, this is obviously a geared system. It's a 7-to-1 gear ratio, so that's going to be a little bit different. But yeah, so that's all you have to really change in your configuration on this guy is your rotational distance for your extruder, and then everything else is fine tuning. Make sure your probe, of course, you're going to have to redo your probe offsets and stuff like that because it's in a different location. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward, as you can see. Really simple to do. The wiring, the most important thing is to get the wiring triple, quadruple check that you got all your wires in the right polarity. On the fans, the top ones are your positive, the bottom ones are negative. Like I said, on this, you're going to have to look at your pinouts. But for the standard, if you're going with the H2 on a Big Tree Tech motherboard, the cord that comes with it is ready to go. Otherwise, you just need to go through and see what's going on with that. Yeah, and you plug it in like this, get it all closed back up, and you're ready to go. That's it. So hopefully this was informational. I do want to point out with that hot end mount, let me get this machine flipped back over. And let's see. Yeah, I just move it like that. So with the hot end mount, I have redesigned it without this little extra piece that's sticking out. Here, how about if I pull this off here and bring it closer? Okay. So like I said, I've redesigned it without this because, as you can see, it's not screwed in, and this thing is solid. It's not moving anywhere. So those two single posts are set. And what I'm thinking of doing, honestly, is just basically making this an open source mount, because it is pretty simple. Obviously, anybody that has good CAD skills can easily see this and be like, oh yeah, done, 10 minutes at the most. But I'm going to make this an open source thing, and I'm going to actually list it on the PCBway site. So if you want to get it made, you can. I think it's somewhere in the range of $30 to get a full all the metal and the parts put in. I'm gonna need to talk to them, make sure they get things all right, because I don't want you guys, if you end up considering to purchase something like that, I want to make sure it's correct. But yeah, otherwise everything will be on there. If you want to just download it, you can print this, but it's not going to actually be too sturdy because of how thin it is. But yeah, that's my new hot end mount and hot end and everything set up, ready to go. I'm gonna, like I said, clean up the wires and things like that, and be on its way. Hopefully everything prints well. It should actually. It's just as sturdy. It's actually more sturdy than the other hot end with the plastic on it was. So I already know that this machine can print it with this hot end. So yeah, pretty straightforward. But anyways, yeah, what do you guys think? That's something that you would want to do? I can put the link down into the description once I get it finalized and put up on the site. So I'll put the link to that. I'll also put it, if you want to follow me on social networks on Twitter and Instagram, I will also put the link there as soon as it becomes available. If anybody's interested, it's like I said, it's designed for a 2020 rail. So any machine that has that, like, you know, Ender 3s and all their different clones and all those different types of machines, anything that has this style of V-rail, aluminum extrusion, it's going to work. So that's where it's at with that. One thing you might have to do, depending on the previous thing, is to adjust your belt. You might have to get a longer belt, depends on your machine and how close together these things were on the existing machine. So if you have a lot of range for adjustment, then you're good. If you don't, if you have very little range of adjustment and it's very, let's say, would it be tighter, for instance, if it needs to be completely tighter, or not wider, I guess it would be. Yeah, wider, then they're not gonna be able to stretch in to get into where I made those little things. So it's just a simple of replacing the belt if you go that route, if you have to. It's not like it's not gonna work. But anyways, that's that. That's the 2-in-1. I got a new mount and I got you guys set up. If you have any questions on how to, you know, if you have any confusion basically on how to get this thing plugged into the machine, let me know. I will do my best to help you out. But as you can see, it's very straightforward. Don't be afraid of these things. The most important thing is that you get everything plugged in properly and you are good to go. And if you do this, you can come back, which I haven't done yet, and get rid of that motor so you can lighten everything so you're not, you know, moving around. Of course, that's on the Z, so it's not that big of a deal. But the lighter, the better on these things, because ultimately you want to go faster. And yeah, this looks maybe kind of big, but it's not. As you can see, the size of the mount, it's the motor is just as wide, pretty much as the whole, not just the motor, but the whole assembly is just as wide as one of those other hot ends, and it doesn't weigh much more at all with all the extra stuff you get, basically, which is more pushing power and a longer heating zone with this specific one. So yeah, it's a cool extruder system. I'm really happy with it. It prints great. So anyways, yeah, that's all I'm gonna do now. I just now realized that this video is like a half an hour long. So if you guys are still here, thank you for watching. Thank you for holding out this long. And again, like I said, when I get that mount set up for sale, and you know, however it is, you may even be able just to download the design on there too. Not sure. But anyways, I'm just gonna open source it just because that's what we do here, right, with 3D printing. And hopefully you can help. If you do click any links, I'm gonna have a PCBway link down below. So if you guys think about, you know, purchasing anything from there or anything like that, use my link and it'll give me a little kickback. Doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps me out with the channel. I do want to again thank PCBway for giving me a sponsor on this video. I'm like blown away that I was even able to get a sponsor, that they offered that to me. That was really awesome of them. So again, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm gonna cut this video off now. Until next time, happy printing. Thanks for watching. Bye.